Hi, so it's been a minute since I've been back here on this channel, like 6 months or something, but I'm here. There's a new Hunger Games out. It feels like it's 2012 again all of a sudden. There has been a lot of excitement around this release, and it's really had me going back into my Hunger Games mode. I have not been able to stop thinking about Sunrise on the Reaping literally since it came out. I read it in a day. So I have like finally had some time to process some thoughts, but I have a lot of ideas for Hunger Games based videos if that's something people are interested in. But today I actually want to talk about the significance of the names in the Hunger Games series themselves. I think Suzanne Collins does a really good job being very deliberate when choosing the names of her characters. She's an author who puts thought into every single thing in this series. She is someone who you can sit down and analyze her work for hours. I think that's why in terms of the dystopian genre, this is by far the best series that we can talk about, but also why it's lasted so long in popular culture and why we are still talking about it today, even before this book, even before Sunrise on the Reaping came out. She just gives us a lot of text that we can analyze and sift through and discuss. And there's just, I just love her. I love her as an author. She's amazing. But I want to talk about the significance of names today. And I have 5 people that I want to start with. If this is something that you are interested in seeing more of, please let me know down in the comments so I can make a part 2. I might make a part 2 anyway, we'll see. This is your spoiler warning because not only am I going to be talking about the significance of the names themselves, but how they relate to the characters themselves in the series and things that they do. So that includes The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and her new book, Sunrise on the Reaping. And just a small disclaimer, these are all my thoughts and opinions based on the research that I've done. You're more than welcome to have another interpretation of these names or ideas of your own. Actually, if you do have your own ideas about the names or the people in these books, please put them down in the comments. I love having discussions about these characters in these books in particular. The first name I want to start off with actually is Panm, a sort of future dystopian United States, if you will. Suzanne has said in interviews that her inspiration for the Hunger Games actually was looking back at gladiator fights. And I promise this is all going to connect to each other in a second. In ancient Rome, gladiator fights were a popular form of violent entertainment. Are you not entertained? Where gladiators who normally and often were enslaved people or criminals who had been arrested, and they were sent into the arenas to fight, often to the death, but not always. This was often a choice for people instead of being put into a death sentence. They could then instead go into the arena. They had fans. They would have some sort of fame, even though they were kind of seen as outsiders to polite society due to the nature of being in the arena and killing people. They also often would fight against animals as well. So you can kind of see a lot of similarities right off the bat with the Hunger Games and the tributes going into the arenas, fighting to the death against other tributes, as well as the mutts and fighting against animals and creatures of nature or freaks of nature. I suppose. So, disclaimer, my Latin is really, really bad. I did not study Latin, and Hugo is not here to correct me because he did actually study Latin. So, this is just my best guess. The name Panem actually comes from a Latin quote that means bread and circuses, and that was by a Roman poet named Juvenal something, to describe how the Roman Empire would use bread and circuses to distract the normal people, the public, from the issues that Rome was facing. So by having these gladiator fights and providing them with this entertainment, they wouldn't be questioning the government so much. They wouldn't be thinking about all of the maybe not so great things about Rome. So the country Panem means bread literally in Latin. And you could kind of like bread, I feel like, is the staple of a lot of foods in a lot of different cultures. It is the largest portion of the diet is bread or carbohydrates in this way. When I think about this, it makes me think about Mother Earth providing in that way, or that the country will provide bread, meaning food, and that we should be grateful to the country for providing us with this food. Now, obviously, that is like not the reality, but I think that that is kind of the intention of why it is called that. And of course, we can't talk about bread without now talking about Peeta. He's probably my favorite character in literature, maybe of all time. I absolutely adore him. Obviously, when we think of the word Peeta, Peeta, his name. We then kind of associate it with the word pita, P-I-T-A, which is a type of bread, which makes sense because his parents run the bakery in District 12, and we see in a flashback scene or in Katniss's memory that one time he was clumsy and dropped bread on the ground. His mother told him to feed the bread to the pigs because it was now unsuitable to feed to, paying customers. And instead, he gave it to Katniss. And in the way that I kind of just said that bread sustains life, I feel like Peeta is also like the bread of the group. He sustains the life of the group. He's kind, he's gentle, he's loyal. And I think in a way, he feeds Katniss emotionally. Like, okay, like just bear with me in this metaphor here. Go with me on this journey. I think that without him, Katniss wouldn't have been able to sustain her own life. That he, in being who he is the reason she's able to go on and to survive. And in that way, he nourishes her emotionally. Are you following me? And of course, I just, looked up what does the name Peeta mean? And according to ancestry.com, Peeta also means rock, coming from the word Peeta, P-E-T-A. I'm not really sure. I'm not going to pretend to know how to pronounce everything here. I think that the name also meaning rock works well for Peeta. He is also a very strong and reliable person, a confidant to Katniss. He is her rock. He is her stability. And I think that if you were to take that as significant to his character, he's seen as such a stable person that when the Capitol takes him and hijacks him in Mockingjay, and he is completely flipped upside down and becomes a very unstable person, it is seen as such a cataclysmic loss for them and for him as a person. He's forever changed by what's done to him. And the person that everyone thought they could rely on is now gone. I think either of these interpretations of his name can work well. It could be a mixture of both, it could be one or the other. But I think when it comes to these sorts of things, the meaning is what you take from it. And if it makes sense to you, then that's correct. I don't think that there's one thing for everything, unless Suzanne Collins says, nope, I meant this thing. But she hasn't said that as far as I know. So I think whatever interpretation means the most to you is the right one. And of course, we can't talk about the Hunger Games without talking about our protagonist, Katniss. The significance of the name Katniss, there's a few layers here, which is really, really cool. We're told in the first book that she is in fact named after the Katniss plant. So that's where I started in my research on her name. The Katniss plant, or the Wapato, I'm assuming, oh my gosh, I'm pronouncing that wrong. It's an aquatic tuber plant that's similar to a potato and is native to North America.
Does he eat the roots? Pretty little thing, but it's determined. Some people call it swamp potato, but I think Katniss has a much nicer ring, don't you?
It has a lot of names, but one stood out to me particularly, and that is Arrowhead. So of course, Katniss is known for using her bow and arrow. It is kind of becomes part of her image, her branding as the Mockingjay. And we see her use the arrow to make a statement multiple times in the books and in the movie, like when she shoots an arrow through the apple in the pig's mouth, and when she shoots the arrow through Coin at the end of Mockingjay. Katniss's ability to use the bow and the arrow is the reason that she's able to feed her family. She's able to use it to go into the woods and to hunt, and therefore also use it in the Hunger Games to protect herself and others. It's these skills that were passed down to her by her father that allowed her to survive not only the districts, but the Hunger Games itself. I think it's interesting as well that the plant Katniss, the scientific name for it is Sagittaria latifolia, and Sagittaria immediately made me think of Sagittarius, of course, which is the constellation of the centaur with the bow and arrow. And Sagittarius is also a fire sign, which is very well suited for our girl on fire. We are also told that Katniss is distantly related to the Covey from District 12, who we learn more about in the Ballads of Songbirds and Snakes. There hasn't been anything confirmed yet by Suzanne about what her specific inspiration was for the Covey, if there was one specific group of people she was pulling from, or some sort of amalgamation of many, but fans have speculated that Covey could potentially be inspired by the Romani people or even Native Americans. And if the Covey are in fact inspired by Native Americans, it would make sense that she would have a nature-inspired name, as well as the fact that Katniss was a very important plant to the diets of Native American peoples. The next person I want to talk about is Coriolanus, or President Snow. He is the main antagonist of the series, obviously, but his name is also of Latin origin. We We learn about the phrase "snow lands on top" from Coriolanus himself in the Ballads of Songbirds and Snakes as a saying that his family says to signify that no matter what hardships they would face, that snow would always land on top. They would always overcome any hardship. The name Coriolanus itself means victorious, which definitely makes sense based on that. It definitely connects to this idea of coming out on top. Yeah, when you're victorious, you come out on top. But there also is a famous Roman general who was named Coriolanus after he led a successful military assault on a city, Corioli. I had to read that because I honestly couldn't say it. Coriolanus also appears in a tragedy written by Shakespeare, which draws on his story. And I don't know a ton about the Roman general in history, but Coriolanus in Shakespeare's play also speaks out against the plebeians, the public, as being lesser than. They are rioting and opposing his rule, and he basically is against popular rule because why should they have a say in government? Because they're just nobodies, which is a very similar sort of vibe that we get from President Snow in the Hunger Games as well, especially in the Ballads of Songbirds and Snakes. He's a very prideful man, and he's also very much a hypocrite. And this sort of separation between the capital and the districts is echoed very clearly in those kinds of statements that we see from Coriolanus. I also think that in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is where we see Coriolanus's first real victory. Up until that point, he was orphaned. He was living with his cousin and his grandma. They were living in poverty, although still in a penthouse, but they were going to lose the penthouse because they didn't have the money to pay for it anymore. And it is through his actions and ideas and his trials, if you will, through the Ballads of Songbirds and Snakes that he comes out on top victorious. And it is because of the way that he's not afraid to take down people who stand in his way that the Hunger Games are where they are when we see them in the 50th, 74th, and 75th Hunger Games. It's because of his actions and ideas that the rest of the story even exists. This victory to separate the capital citizens and the districts even more through entertainment and manipulation. I think that this was his first victory that then led him to the presidency. And the last person I want to talk about in this video is Plutarch. He is a very interesting character. The name Plutarch itself derives from a Greek word that means riches and wealth, and I feel like somewhere this has to connect to the Roman god Pluto, who's the Roman equivalent to Hades, the god of death in the underworld. But I'm going to leave it there for now because I actually have nothing to substantiate that. But when I heard that wealth and riches, that is what I thought of. But there was a Greek biographer and author in the 1st century named Plutarch, and he published well over 200 works in his time. His most famous work features the stories from Greek and Roman soldiers and the telling of their lives and deeds, the things that they did during their time. I think this is really interesting because when we meet Plutarch in the original trilogy, he was a game maker.
Peeta, this is Plutarch Heavensby, head game maker, successor to Seneca Crane.
And he was someone who worked for the capital but was secretly feeding the rebellion underneath. Suzanne Collins said in an interview with Time, Plutarch is creating the story and he's creating the arena and he's manipulating the characters. A writer isn't far from a game maker. So his work in creating narratives and stories in the game, Suzanne says, is similar to a writer, and I think she even said that she sees herself a lot in him because of that. In Sunrise on the Reaping, though, we meet him in a completely new context. Instead of a game maker, he's now a cameraman who is covering the footage of the 50th Hunger Games. He is quite literally capturing and retelling the stories of the tributes as they're being sent to the Hunger Games. During this time when we speak with him, we also see him manipulating the people and the footage around him to make the story more interesting or intriguing to the audience of the capital. He even uses his influence to save Lenore Dove's life during the reaping when he asks Drusilla if they can spare her life so that they can use her tears when they reenact the reaping in which Haymitch is now actually getting reaped. That was crazy, by the way. Sorry. He then kind of forces Haymitch and Luella's families to act on camera their weeping and their tears over and over and over again to get the reaction that he wants in order for them to spend a minute with their children before taking them away to their deaths. He is truly a storyteller and someone who wasn't afraid to create characters for an audience and manipulate them however he can to make the story more and more interesting. Similar to how an author would when they're trying to create interesting characters in a story, you put them through pain. When you want an interesting character, you make bad things happen to them. You want the audience to root for them. And that's really what Plutarch was doing here. In that way, I do think that he really captures that essence of, an ancient Greek author and biographer creating stories. So those are the characters I have for you today. If I missed your favorite character, let me know who I should cover in the next video. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching and for being here. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe to my channel. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.